Thank you very much, Dr. Jasmine, for that very generous and kind introduction. Good morning to everybody. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh to everybody. I want to jump right in, to be honest. But I wanted to ask the moderator if it's possible to keep the chat box enabled while my session is going on. And I would like to request the audience to, not to only ask questions which are specific to what's happening at the time. I'll say this politely, there's no need to say, oh, I'm this person, I'm that person, I'm from this institute, nice to meet you, assalamu alaikum, because, that kind of hijacks the entire purpose. But I want to still use the chat box to make sure that, as I ask questions, as I'm going through the content, I want to kind of verify that, you guys are able to keep up, or if you have any questions at the moment, I will try my best to address it. I think that in essence will make sure that we are both engaged and it will keep the session more interesting. If it's just one-way traffic, then it's easy to tune out as well. And I've had a bit of a glitch as well. I usually have my slides to be very visual in the sense that they're less wordy, but exactly the opposite happened. When I moved my diagrams from a software into the PowerPoint, it somehow there was some corruption and I had to remove a lot of my diagrams just this morning and I had to redo them in Word. So exactly the opposite thing happened. It's just a whole bunch of words today and very few diagrams. So that's unfortunate. And that's one of the reasons I also need the chat box, to make sure that, we have a smooth flow to the to today's class. Okay. So this is one. The other thing is today's content. There are two parts that I'm presenting. I just wanted to verify, is there a break between the two sessions, 45-minute sessions, or do I just carry on, or?
Just carry on.
Carry on.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. So that way I don't really need to divide between the two parts, because essentially as we're going through the class, the comparative element will naturally come in, because you notice that the first part is the Islamic economic system, right? The second part is comparative economic system, but actually as we're going through the content, we will be doing the comparative elements as well, okay? So just a note to the participants, just make sure that you use the chat box properly. And if I ask a question, then you can post your messages there, and I will try my best to keep up with the conversation as well as I'm going through the slides. Okay, let me just start sharing here. Here are my slides. Can you confirm that the slides are visible?
It's coming, but not yet.
Okay, it's a bit frozen here at my end as well.
It's coming soon.
Yeah, I think my net connection here is a bit choppy, surprisingly. Let's see.
We retry. Right again.
I think something should have happened now. No.
No, yeah. Yeah, okay, nice.
Yes, okay, yeah.
Okay.
There's a slight lag here. Okay, let me just go into presentation mode then. Okay, and I will keep the chat box floating somewhere here. Okay, all right. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And good morning or evening, depending on where you are. Good night, afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you very much for joining, and especially thank you for taking interest in this course. On the one side, we have the fiqh side of things, and that makes things a lot easier for us, because we're able to teach the economic aspects without really explaining the fiqh side. So I hope that this complementary approach will benefit you, and we're able to cover a lot of ground. As you know, just a bit of backdrop, economics is basically an enabler of many other disciplines, such as business and accounting and things like that. As such, it's like a mother subject of the social sciences, right? Like the way we look at physics, right, as enabling some of the other subjects. And so, when you look into economics, it kind of gives you an overview of things and gives you a structure of things and how things should be, especially the underpinning elements. So it's very good that, it's good to see so many participants taking active interest. And we hope that, as it continues, as this, the course continues, the interest and the number of participants increases, inshallah. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is the outline. Essentially, there are 4 parts. First, we'll look at the definition of what is a system and how do we look at economic systems. Then the second part is we'll be looking at some of the defining aspects of economic systems. Okay, these are in 3 areas: the philosophical foundations, operational principles, and the goals. Next, we'll look at key features of these economic systems, right? And we're looking at 5 specific areas. And this is where the comparative will kind of start, okay? When we're looking at the key features. And then we're going to go into the comparative economic system, and we will be going through, we'll be doing a comparison at perhaps a philosophical level, okay, at the beginning, and then we will look at some more pragmatic comparisons, okay, just so that we can get an idea of what an Islamic economic system is. Essentially, I haven't listed it down because that was in a diagram, but the objective of today's course is that at the end of our session, hopefully you will get a better understanding of what an economic system is about and what specifically the Islamic economic system is about and what are its objectives and how does it function and what is its place in the contemporary world. Okay, essentially those are our objectives. Okay, and it's pretty straightforward, as you can see. Okay, so let's dive right in. What is a system? So I've taken a few definitions off the internet and off a few dictionaries and put them together based on their relevance. Okay, as you know, system is a very broad, thing or concept. Okay, but generally speaking, right, a system is a set. And notice that I've italicized some of the words in, to highlight its importance, right? So the first thing you notice is that, a system is a set or assemblage of things connected or interdependent, forming a complex unity. So the things that I've highlighted here is the assemblage of things, right? That means it's a collection of things. So a system cannot be an entity in itself. It's not a single thing, right? It has multiple parts that are working, right? So it's composed of different elements, different parts, and it forms a unity. That means the parts are supposed to congregate or come together in some kind of union, all right? And that is essentially what a system is. And then when the second definition talks about how different entities behaving in a particular way, in a coordinated manner. So this is an extension of the earlier one, right? There is an aspect of coordination required. That means they need to be working together. So the different components, yes, but they're not, they're interdependent, yes, but even there is an element of timing and organization included here, okay? So that means that things have to be happening in a specific way, using a specific pattern for that outcome. And hence also this defines that element of complexity, okay? If you look at the next definition, right? A whole composed of parts, we already know this, in an orderly arrangement according to some plan or a scheme. So we know from the previous 2 definitions that it's a whole. We know that there's some kind of order and there's some kind of arrangement to it. But also we understand that there is a kind of plan or a scheme to things. That means there is a kind of direction, there's a kind of direction where we're supposed to go to, which talks about which introduces the final definition, right? Which is that systems exist to achieve a common goal or a shared purpose. Okay, so if you look at these 4 definitions, we essentially get an idea of what a system is. It's basically many subcomponents coming together to form a complete unity, all right? And when we have that unity, the reason for that unity is because we have a shared purpose. There's something to be achieved, something to gain here that is in the interest of all these subcomponents. And so these subcomponents are invested in working in a certain way to achieve that common goal. Okay, if we were to take a non-living thing, right, like for example a watch, right, if you open the back of your watch, right, you're going to see so many components and things working together, right? And the idea of what is that purpose of that system, that complex machine, right? It's supposed to deliver the time, right? It's supposed to give you the date, some kind of chronometer, right? It gives you time and date and that kind of thing, right? If you look at a phone, right, you get a similar thing. Of course, the purpose is a lot broader, right? The multiple functions, but at the end of the day, it's supposed to deliver a kind of digital solution to you, to make life better, right? So this is essentially what a system is. So when we look at social systems, right, because of course economics is a social science, right? We're looking at a system that is supposed to deal, right? It's working towards a kind of social goal, right? So this system has a social orientation. It deals with human behavior, and we're moving towards some kind of social goal. So I hope, the definition of what a system is and its essential components are clear. Okay. All right. Let's go to the next slide. By the way, when I'm moving the camera screen, is it also moving around in your screen, or you can't see it? Anyone in the comments? Is it? Because what I'm doing is when I'm looking at my slides, I'm teaching off Zoom itself, so I'm moving the camera box left and right. Okay, all right. So in the comments, it doesn't seem to be moving for you guys. So I think it's okay. That's good. All right. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we know what a system is. Now we're going to look at it from an economic perspective. Okay, so when we look at a system from an economic perspective, basically we're looking at a system of social science, right? Economics is part of a social science, right? And as such, it's a system that is supposed to do with society, with humans, with human behavior, human welfare, right? So essentially, again, let's look at it from the economic context. It's an entity consisting of different subcomponents. All right, what are these components from an economic perspective? We're looking at economic agents. Can you give me some economic agents in the chat? What do we mean by economic agents? Give me some examples. All right, so economic agents can be like, government, consumer, firm, wonderful, right? So these are economic agents, okay? And when we look at institutions, right? Give me some examples of institutions. Well, we have public institutions like governments, right? And then we have the ministries, okay? And then what other institutions, right? We have education, we have bank, financial institutions, wonderful, yeah, great. So we have institutions and we have infrastructure. I think you all know what infrastructure is. Infrastructure is basically the environment, right, which allows interaction between the different agents, right? Putting it very simply, right? It allows agents and institutions to all work together and communicate and become mobile and coordinate, right? So essentially, that's how we can define the infrastructure. It's like an enabling environment, but it's very broad, okay? Right, it's good to see you guys engaging in the chat. I won't be taking questions, unfortunately, yeah? You can try and, because I do see a hand raised, Rabi, but what you can do is try and ask your question in the chat, okay? And keep it very brief because, I don't want to get interrupted as I'm going through the slides, yeah? But, if you have something to ask, by all means ask, but ask in the chat, okay? But, just make sure it's directly relevant to the slide, okay? So it doesn't throw me off, okay? So essentially, we know what these micro entities are, or these subcomponents are, right? And now they all come together, they organize and coordinate themselves into a complex unity, all right? And this basically forms different markets and other subsystems, okay? So when, for example, consumers, right, they try to coordinate with producers, okay? Then we get different institutional mechanisms, and all these three, for example, when we have, let's say, the consumer and the producer, right, and financial institutions coming together, right, we get something like the circular flow, right? And therefore, we have a kind of framework developing or a subsystem developing, okay? And therefore, we have different levels of markets, right? We have input markets, we have output markets, right? And this is how, everything coordinates, comes together, and we get the development of a system, Okay. And of course, remember, why are different economic agents coordinating together? Why do they coordinate together? Like, why should producers work together with consumers, right? I'm giving a big clue here. Right? Generally, the idea is that there is a mutual interest, right? There's a mutual interest. I gain something by, you know, I gain something by trying to coordinate or having a relationship with producers, right? I can get something that I cannot make, right? And producers gain because they are gaining profit, as some of you mentioned, right? And financial institutions gain because they can make, you know, some kind of benefit as well, right? And therefore, right, it's in our incentive to kind of work together. Okay, so this is very important. It's the system only works because we are invested in the system. We're interested in making the system work because we're getting a benefit from that system. Now, if we don't have that common goal or shared purpose, like Abdul Qadri says, right? If we don't have that, then what happens to the system? Essentially, the system stops serving its purpose, right? I'm not interested in the system because it doesn't give me a benefit, and therefore the system stops working as efficiently or the way it should, right? Because as soon as people start taking, you know, as people start moving out of the system, right? That means that the system has less components to work and it may get less effective in delivering what it needs to deliver. So it's very important that the subcomponents are invested in the system. That means they believe that the system is helping them get their objectives achieved, right? Like shared goals, yes. And if you notice, when if you look at, for example, a political system, right? Why is it that some people, you have different political parties running for elections, right? You have different political candidates, running for elections, right? Sometimes people are not willing to vote, right? Why would people willingly not want to participate in the electoral system, right? It's your country. You care about your country, right? You want to make a decision. You need to choose a leader. And people are like, no, I don't want to choose a leader, right? So Kamaruddin says, well, it's a waste of time. Why is it a waste of time? Because, yeah, very good. Basically, like Mubarak says, there is no real alignment between what you want the leader to do and what the leader who is running for elections is willing to do. There's a difference. You want a leader who will make, let's say, who will deal with inequality. Okay, that's what you want. But the leaders or the candidates who are there, they don't represent your view. They are people who maybe, you know, support corporate interests and things like that. So you're like, no, I don't want to participate in this electoral system. It's a sham. It's corrupt. It's this, it's that, right? And generally, we don't participate in the system because we don't believe in it. Okay. And the reason I'm telling you this is when we look at a system, right, because of our, you know, our education background, we look at a system simply as components working together so that they can deliver time or, you know, something like this. It's very mechanical. Okay. But actually, a system requires belief. All right. For social science or human science systems, for the system to work, people need to believe in the system. And if people's beliefs are not aligned together, then basically the system will not achieve what it's supposed to achieve because it is not representing what you're supposed to, what you want to get from it. Okay. And so if, for example, we have many people of an Islamic orientation, right? Like, you know, we believe in Islam and we have this common goal, but at the same time, we have a whole bunch of other people who have something else, like they believe in secularism or something, then the system becomes less effective, or the system is not able to even gain momentum to become a full-fledged system. All right, because, you know, you will not participate in it the way you should. Okay, and therefore the system doesn't develop accordingly. The institutions, right, that have your goals, right, a market, right? If a market, let's say that, you know, you're on Lazada or Shopee or something, okay, and you find out that Shopee is charging extra prices. Okay, it's unfair. They you know, the product return service, you know, the after sale service is not good. Then you're not going to go to that platform anymore. You'll be like, no, this doesn't represent the values that I want. I want good customer service. I want a good price. I want the lowest price. I don't want these kind of producers who are cheating me. So you're not going to be invested in the system anymore, right? So I think the example is quite clear that your belief in the operational ability of that system right, is very important. If it doesn't, then you are not going to participate. You're going to be passive, right? And then we'll be like, we don't want to vote. Okay, but again, where does that get us? By not participating, right? Because others are defining that system and we're a part of it. Okay, so remember, an institution, even when we want to form an institution, it's made up of economic agents, right? We have a whole bunch of producers who are in Shopee, and if producer values are bad, right? If they have the wrong values, then the institutional value is bad. Shopee stands for profiteering now, not for fair dealings, mutual benefit, right? The value has changed, isn't it? Similarly, when we have the wrong value systems in place, which is why, we emphasized earlier, right, about the Islamic worldview and all those things, right? If we do not have the right values in place, okay, then the systems, institutions that develop according to the wrong values, right, those institutions will promote the wrong values as well. Okay, and this is why it's very important to have the right orientation in mind. Okay, so yeah, like many of you mentioned, like how many of us will even be willing to do business based on trust, right? Okay, it's no longer. In some places, they'll say that, yeah, okay, you forgot your money, why don't you go and come back, right? And there'll be no collateral. Another person will say, no, you have to pay right now. Okay, cash right now, or leave the product and go, right? So these kind of attitudes and things have a lot to do with our values. Okay, all right. Now, so moving on to achieve shared economic objectives, I think this is very clear. What are some of the objectives of an economic system? This is an open question, but again, it will depend. See, I like this answer by Achong. I hope I'm saying it right, but he says public welfare. That's good. For you to say public welfare first, that's very good. It's a good value, because many of us will say that, well, it's about me getting a good job. It's about me having economic opportunities, right? That generally is our focus. But, people saying, things like, employment, or, public welfare, or social cohesion, or inequality, right? These are all goals which are much bigger than us. And, it shows that we care at a different level. Okay, so again, important thing, economic systems will have different values, right? Okay. All right, so remember, an economic system is a system of social science, and it's addressing two issues. When we look at the definition of economics in a very simple way, we're looking at two issues, right? One is we have a resource scarcity, okay? Yeah, relative scarcity. And we have resource scarcity, which is relatively scarce, meaning that it's not immediately available to us. This is one problem, okay? The other problem is that we have human behavior. We have an issue with human behavior. Right? Now, if you look at economics, right, whenever we look at our textbooks, what does classical economics say about the human being? Just tell me the assumptions very quickly in the chat box. Yeah, very good. Now, generally, we have Homo economicus, like Dr. Mahyudi was saying last time, yes. Who is very self-interested, and he just focuses on himself, and man is greedy. And what else? Okay, man is greedy. What else is he besides greedy? Is he emotional? Does he do random things? Yes, very good, Abdul Aziz. Man is rational. Okay, so he's very rational, and he is what? He's self-interested or profit maximizing. He's a profit maximizing agent, full stop. Right? The studies about human being is done. Do you notice in all economics textbooks, the first chapter, they will make an assumption in the first few paragraphs about human behavior, full stop, khalas. That's it. Human behavior done. We're done with it. Now let's deal with scarce resources. So even the human element in economics is so downplayed in our system. We do not talk about, what are some of the nuances of human beings, right? Economics kind of is assuming that, I can put Aliu, into an equation, and that's it. Aliu is done. We know Aliu. Aliu is rational, and Muhammad Jama is, he's self-interested. Full stop. That's it. We know every person. Okay, but of course it's more complex. Okay, so even the focus of economic systems, right, is wrong. Their orientation is wrong. Okay, because it's focusing only on one part of the problem. It's talking about scarce resources. But that's not the only problem, right? from Islamic economics, when you look at the worldview, the aspects of worldview that we're looking into, we also realize that it's a behavior problem, right? Where, like, for example, conventional economics assumes that human beings are greedy, full stop, that's it. Islamic economics, right? What does Islam say about human beings? Are human beings greedy? Yes or no? I think Islam says human beings are greedy too, right? Yeah, it says. So yes and no are both correct answers, okay? Human beings are also greedy, yes, but Islam doesn't put a full stop there. Islam says, yes, human beings by nature, they love material things, they want things, it motivates them, it's good, but there's a line there. Don't cross that line. When you get too greedy, it's bad. Do this, do that. Islam gives you prescriptions, right? It says that, yes, man is greedy by nature. It's possible, but do not give in to the temptation. Control your nafs, fight your thing, right? So Islam doesn't put a full stop there. It's dynamic, meaning that economics has a lot to do with human behavior, right? The incentives that we have, we can't just assume something about human beings and say, oh, so these are human beings, this is what we should do. No, we have to be studying the human psyche a lot more. So economics has a lot of new areas, I think right? Like behavioral psychology, we have behavioral finance, right? These are becoming very human-centric, right? Neuroscience. Okay, so economics is going into these areas now because of the shortcomings of conventional economics, right? But Islamic economics has these narratives already, okay? So the important thing to remember is that because we are different people with different mindsets, right? Economic issues are also understood subjectively. If you're a person who thinks that, the economy is there to serve you and your purpose and your welfare alone, right? And we need to take care of people because if we don't take care of people, it's going to harm my welfare, then that's your view. Okay, another person will say, no, economics is about serving me, full stop. I don't care about other people. That's their view. Okay, so based on the view, the economic system will adopt those views. Remember, we were talking about how institutions kind of adopt people's common goals, right? And that becomes the system. Same thing. If the economic agent at the base, does not have the right ideas or conception of values, right? Those things kind of align and form an institution because there are a lot of people who want the same thing, similar ideology, want the same thing. They form an institution, right? Through the political process or whatever, then they are able to get those things that they want, okay? So the issue is, what do you want? And those things are very subjective, okay? All right. So let's look at the economic system in context. What is it supposed to do? So this is a very important diagram, okay? And when we look at it, it starts with the worldview, which is why we started our course with that. And once we're exposed to the worldview, or I'm talking from an Islamic economic perspective, when we have the right worldview or the right conception of what Allah wants from us, what Islam wants from us, and we are still learning. I'm still learning. I can't say perfectly, oh, this is what the system is, or this is exactly what Islam requires of us from an Islamic economic system. We're still doing research. We're still learning, right? It's a very young science, okay? But it starts with our worldview. So if my worldview is very self-centric, right? It's very self-serving, then my values will, of course, be shaped according to that. My idea of a meaningful existence, can you see? Right? My idea of a meaningful existence will be defined according to my worldview, right? And based on that, based on my value system, we will form institutions or create institutions, right? That are economic, political in nature, right? That are able to give us or operationalize what that meaningful living process is, right? So we get the system, we have the wrong values, then we have the wrong system. Okay, and we have the wrong direction and we have the wrong thing. So the difficult part is when you are coexisting with so many people with different mindsets, with different values, how do we move forward then, right? It's such a challenge, okay? Another thing, by the way, when we talk about systems is very important. We need to look at Islam, not only Islamic economics, we need to look at the way we live Islam as a living process, as a system. Right? The way Allah has defined our existence for us is a system, right? The way the weather works, the way the planets turn, the way our solar system is, the tide of the sea, the orbit of the moon, all of these are based on a system. The earth, our world will be destroyed systematically. We know this. There is an end to this world, right? It's all a system. And Allah operates within that system, right? I think we're aware of those ayats, right? Which say that, Allah has created the world in a process. right? In stages, right? So there is a system. So remember that we are part of a bigger system, right? And many people call this the Tawhidic paradigm, right? We have the Tawhidic paradigm. Everything is emanating from Allah, and we have multiple subsystems that consist of, that make up deen, our way of life, religion, right? And Islamic economics is part of that. It's one of those subsystems of that big Tawhidic system, if you will. Okay. So that's an important way to conceive systems. Yeah. The Islamic economic system is also a smaller system of a bigger system. Okay. All right. Great. Let's go to the next slide then. Okay. So when we look at approaches to economic systems, there are three approaches that we can take to understand what is an Islamic economic system, or what is an economic system. Okay. So the first one is a theoretical approach. Okay, this is something that conventional economics, we learn a lot in our textbooks, that, oh, you know, mankind is like this, all right, and this is how consumers are, and therefore we have consumer utility theory, right? And based on that, we identify our economics, all right? So we look at the micro foundations or the micro theory of, you know, economic agents, the theory of their behavior, and therefore we define economics according to that. So if we look at what we were talking about, right, I asked you, like, what does Islamic economics say about conventional, what does conventional economics say about the human being, right? We were all able to tell those things, right? Those are the theoretical foundations, right? Or the micro theory. No, a person is self-maximizing, a person is self-interested, but he's rational, okay? And therefore, this is what happens, right? So we define the system according to the micro theory. We are not going to use this approach because, you know, we're looking at an overview. When we talk about a worldview in Islam, we're trying to understand the bigger picture, right? And generally in Islam, we look at unity. We look at unity in ideas. We look at cohesion. We do not look at random or coincidence, right? And therefore, the approach to understanding an Islamic system is more from the top down. What does Allah say? How it is? What are the values that we're able to pick up from the sources? And how does that translate down, right? And how is that a functional system? That's what we need to understand. So we're not going from micro, we're not going bottom up. We're not going to see, oh, this is how individuals are and this is how the system must be. No, right? Sometimes we can come to the opposite result, because when we're studying human behavior, right, how do we know that that person is behaving the way they should, right? So there's a bit of an issue there, right? So the one problem is going from the atomic level, the atomistic level, right, and generalizing to everyone. This is one problem. The other problem is that, you know, when we look at an individual, how do we know that that individual is representative in general, or that person has the right values, right? So we take a general top-down approach. The second one is also a very common approach. I think in our studies, we do this a lot, right? If we look at the Malaysian economy, right, or, you know, wherever you're from, if we look at, I'm here in Malaysia, so I'm using that as an example. But if I look at Malaysia as an economy, I'm going to define the Malaysian economic system according to the output that it has, or the sectoral contribution to output that it has. So we have the primary sector, right? We have the secondary sector, which is the manufacturing sector, and we have the tertiary sector, which is services, right? And we'll say that, oh, you know, for example, Malaysia is a secondary or a manufacturing economy that is making a transition to the services sector. Okay, it's moving consistently towards the service. So this is another way of defining an economic system. But if we do it this way, we're kind of describing it without looking at the underlying, you know, values of that economy, right? So this doesn't really serve our purpose of understanding economic systems, okay? The third way, right, is where we take a comparative approach or the traditional approach, okay? And this is where we kind of look at the philosophical underpinnings of an economic system. For example, we have capitalism, we have socialism, right? And we know what those things mean generally, okay? We will be going through it very roughly, okay? I think looking at your answers, I'm very happy. I think a lot of you seem to have a basic idea of how things are working, and not even basic, you know, some of your answers are very nice. So that's good. I think it'll facilitate our discussion nicely. So when we look at the comparative or the traditional approach, right? It's based on the philosophy of that system, right? And this makes sense because, when we're looking at an Islamic economic system, we are trying to understand, okay, what are the philosophical foundations of Islam that we're supposed to apply to an economic system? So this is an ideal approach to take, and this is the one we're going to use, okay? All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the first thing is we're going to look at the philosophical foundations, all right? And what does that mean? It basically means we're going to look at the fundamental nature, right? Or the order of things. And remember, we talked about this being value-based, right? So we're going to look at the fundamental nature of this economy, of the Islamic economic system, all right? And then we're going to look at some of its, where's my mouse? Okay, we're going to look at some of its operational principles, okay? How do these values, all right, how these values are put to practice, or how are they realized, okay? So we're not going to go into too much detail, but we're going to get a conception of how it happens, all right? And, through a few examples, perhaps. And once we understand that, then we're going to try and understand some of the aims and goals of the economic system, okay, in place. All right. I think that M is a typo, all right? So don't worry about that. Okay. So these are the three things that we're going to do in the traditional approach. We're looking at the philosophy. What are the operational principles that makes the philosophy work? Because a philosophy is generally what? An idea, right? If a philosophy is an idea of something, right? It's a concept. So this is something, it's a concept that may have been mentioned in the Quran and Sunnah in our example, and we're going to try and understand the concept. However, that idea is great. It sounds wonderful, but how do we make it work? Okay, how do we make these concepts come alive? And this is where we start looking at the operational principles. Okay, all right. And so when we look at the foundation that Islam gives us, then we're able to see, well, how do we allow these philosophies to actually work in the system? Okay, and then once we have the philosophy, once we have the operational principles in place, right, we need to make sure that we're moving in a certain direction to achieve those goals and objectives, right? Those and so what we have basically are those aims and goals to kind of measure where are we doing on those values. Okay, so philosophical foundations, they give us an idea, they define our value for us. What is value? What is good? What is bad? That's essentially what philosophical foundation is. Okay, the second stage is, well, this is good, this is bad. How do we make good or bad happen? This is when we start defining our principles. That's why we call it operational principles. Okay, we make them measurable in the system now. Okay, finally, we have aims and goals to achieve those values. How do we know that people are better? How do we know that welfare is increasing? How do we know, right? This is how we have the aims and goals to see that we're able to measure those, how we're moving forward on those values that we have. Okay, so we have aims and goals, and those are generally our economic objectives. For example, if we believe that inequality is a very serious problem, okay, how can somebody be so rich, hoard so much of our resources, whereas somebody is so poor, they're living like an animal. They can't even like get food, water, clothing. Can you imagine, right? How is it possible to live in that contradiction, right? If we value that narrative a lot, right, then our goals and objectives will be along those lines that, have we dealt with inequality yet? We will not focus so much on economic growth. Our main problem will be inequality. Okay, so depending on the values, okay? So basically, aims and objectives are a yardstick or a goal for those values that the system has. I hope it's clear. Right. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to look at each of them in a bit more detail. I just gave you a little bit of a, an intro. So where are our philosophical foundations coming from? Well, obviously, I think you all know the answer to this. It's coming from our primary sources in Islam, which is the Quran and the Sunnah. Okay, and we all know already that Islam is deen, right? When we were defining, the different aspects of worldview, one of the first things we looked at was Islam. And right, Islam, we know, is a way of life. It's a process. It's a system. And therefore, we, if it's a system, then economics is an essential part of it because it financially enables us. It's the means through which we're able to move forward in life, to progress, right? material welfare. So because economics is enabling, economics enables that aspect of life, it's an essential part of progression, right? Which is an essential part of our deen, progression, right? Perfection, like doing the best with what Allah has given us. That's generally a goal in our life, right? Like making the best of things with what we have, right? That's why I look different from you guys. You know, all of you are like so good looking, and and each of you have different skill sets, right? And that's because, right, Allah has trusted you with that. Allah has given you good looks and given somebody more intelligence and somebody more physical, prowess. Whatever it is, right? Each of us have different unique abilities, and the idea is to try and make the best of it. And the way to enable it, of course, is material welfare. I mean, not the only way, right? But there's spiritual progression, there's social progression, but there's also economic progression, financial progression. And that's an essential part of our being as well. And therefore, of course, economic life is inseparable from our path to becoming better people, our path to worshiping Allah better and doing justice to his creation, right? So when we do it that way, basically, we realize that Islam, economics is an essential part of life. And, there can't be a separation. We can't have religion on this side and we cannot have, economics on the other. You can't be like, oh, I'm going to earn as much money as I can, all right? And I'm not going to worry about, my spiritual well-being later on, or, like the two are essentially connected. Okay. So, from Surah Hud as well, right? We have the story of Prophet Shu'aib, right? Peace be upon him. And often he's called the prophet of economics, okay? Because why? The story, the lesson that we gain from his narration, his story, right? Is that, he asked his people, right? The Madian people basically to submit to Allah. And there was a lot of corrupt practices, like a lot of cheating in the marketplace based on, who you are, like the measures would be unfair, the price might be overcharged. There's a lot of trickery and corruption. So he basically explicitly deals with these issues, okay? And that's why the Quran gives a clear example that, submitting to Allah has a lot to do with fair play and doing the right thing and morality. And all of this is connected in the way you do business, right? And the way you have economic dealings, right? So essentially, this is another example of interconnectedness. There are plenty more, right? How the Quran talks about riba and how we should be doing contract, following sales rather than, so there are a lot of examples of, economic dealings within the Quran, right? In the form of ayats, right? And so it's an essential part of religion. There is no disconnect, right, between the two. Okay, so our philosophical foundations come from the Quran, all right? And these are the specific ones, all right? I think we all understand Tawheed. We were talking about it at the beginning, so this is a nice way, to qualify that introduction that we had, right? That Allah is absolute, right? He has no partners and he's the absolute power, and there's nothing that comes near or close to him that, and he's the sovereign power. That means the only power, right? The only giver of life, the only creator. Everything that has been created by human beings is a result of what he has given us, right? So there would be nothing if not for him. That realization, that's Tawheed, right? I think you've done the Islamic worldview courses, so I'm not going to go too much into that. Okay, so we have ibadah, and basically, again, economic dealings are an ibadah, right? Any economic act, it means to attain the pleasure of Allah, right? So any economic act, anything that you're buying or selling, right, has the potential to be an act of worship. Any kind of thing. The way you choose to greet a person, the way you choose, to buy something or not buy something, the way you choose to give charity, right? You could give charity like, you could give it because somebody is looking, or you can give it because you think somebody cares, or somebody needs it, sorry. You can give it because somebody needs it, or you can give charity because somebody is watching, right? What is your intention behind it? So you can easily change your intention. If you're giving it because you want people to see you and think you're a good guy, you can actually think that, no, I'm going to change my niyyah and I'm going to give it when nobody's looking, or I'm giving it because, I want Allah to notice it. So you can easily align your economic objectives, right? Like giving charity or helping somebody, paying a higher price to help a local producer, right? These are things you can do for the sake of Allah. So your action, instead of just being economic, can become economic and what? And spiritually enabling, right? So it can help you progress and things like that. Yes, it can become an act of ibadah as well. Okay, so when we are looking at it, okay, somebody's asking why is the Sunnah not included? It is actually, okay, I may have put it as just Quran, but basically primary sources, okay? So in some of my other slides, you're going to see Quran and Sunnah. They're essential parts, okay? So yeah, it's whenever I say Quran or Quran, just assume I'm meaning both, yeah? Basically primary sources, right? Okay, so even the examples I had given, right, are essentially including the different prophets and all. So it's not only the Sunnah as in what the Prophet ﷺ has told us, it also includes other prophets as well as mentioned in the Quran. Okay, so take it that way, all right? All right, the next one is the Khalifa. Okay, I think we all understand, and this is coming from our understanding of Tawheed, all right? So when we have Allah is the absolute sovereign power, right? Immediately that means that every other creation is there to serve Allah. And this is where the concept of Khilafah comes from, Khalifa, right? That man is a servant of Allah and he's an agent of Allah. He forwards Allah's ideologies and, not Allah's commandments and, Allah, the values that we're supposed to have that Allah has given us. It's our job to forward those things, okay? So even though we have a car, okay, we can't just do whatever we want with the car. Okay, we cannot use it in an irresponsible way because at the back of our mind, we're like, no, yes, we do own the car legally, but we have come into the ownership of that car with the will of Allah. Allah wanted us to have this car, and therefore the way we use that car has a lot to do with how Allah will perceive us when using that car. And if we use it for the wrong reasons, and like if I destroy it or abuse it or don't take care of it or whatever, right, then I'm accountable to Allah because that car could have gone to somebody else. And another person could have done better with that car, but it came to me. What did I do with it, right? So this concept of Khilafah basically means that we are agents of Allah. Whatever position we're playing, we are agents of Allah, and we cannot forget that. That's one of the underpinning things. The next philosophical foundation, of course, is Tazkiyah, okay? And economic activity is a means to purify ourselves. So this is very clear, right? Whatever we do, there is a material side of things, okay? But at the same time, and material welfare does appease a part of us. It's also a part of our progression. But remember that even the inner self, the soul, okay, economic activities are a way for us to even achieve our spiritual satisfaction or, achieve our Islamic goals and objectives, right? So whenever we buy something, we should give charity for that, right? Like zakat. Why do we pay zakat? The reason we pay zakat is to purify our income, not to help the poor. Islam doesn't say, oh, you're helping the poor, right? Islam didn't say that that's why zakat is there, right? Now, the 8 asnaf which are identified, yes, that's who we should give zakat to. But the primary reason that we give zakat is because Allah said so. It's a requirement it's a pillar of our faith. It's a pillar of Islam, right? We must pay zakat. Okay, that's why we do it. And one of the reasons is to purify our wealth as well. Okay, so remember that economics and an economic system or the philosophy behind it is also self-purification, all right? Inner development as well, not only material welfare. Okay, I think this is clear. All right, let's go to the next one. Okay, and then we have the operational principles. So from the philosophy, right, we understand these 4 concepts. Now, these are not exhaustive, yeah? When we looked at the previous slide, the 4 that I gave, they could be more, all right? But these are the main ones that we have identified so far and we're working with so far, okay? Similarly, operational principles, the way we operationalize these philosophies that we looked at just now, okay, these also have different, these also are not exhaustive, okay? There could be more, there could be many more, okay? These are just examples so that you understand you understand the process. Okay, so the first one is, of course, adl and ihsan, okay? And adl and ihsan here, I put there's a slight difference, right? I think all of you know this, that adl is to do justice. That means putting the right thing in the right place, or doing justice to something, giving something that what it is due, right? That's how we do justice. However, when we look at the concept of ihsan, right? Ihsan, adl is giving what's due. Ihsan is going beyond that, right? When we're practicing ihsan, sometimes we might actually there might be an element of self-sacrifice involved. To make somebody happy, we go an extra mile now. We don't have to do it, but we go beyond our basic rights to enable somebody. Okay, let's say that I took a loan from somebody. I took 100 ringgit. Okay, and now that person helped me at a time of need, and I'm giving back now. I'm paying back that person. Okay, and I pay back that person 120. Okay. Yeah, that's a good example. Ihsan is acting as if Allah is looking. Yeah, correct. Now, if I pay this extra 110 or 120 ringgit, is that haram? Is that like not allowed? Is that ihsan or is that like haram? Okay, Muhammad Salah thinks that we have created riba. Ihsan, okay, is allowed. Okay, all right. So let's qualify this. It's a good example. Yeah, most of you are right. Okay, it depends on the situation. It is riba if the creditor, the person I borrowed from, is forcing me to pay. If he says that, no, I gave you money, you caused me a lot of difficulty, I want compensation, extra 10 ringgit, extra 20 ringgit, then it's riba. But if I owe him 100 ringgit and I feel, that he has done me such a big service and I want to help him, so I give him the extra 120 from myself, then it is ihsan. I am going beyond my rights to him. I'm enabling, I'm helping him. Okay, then this is an act of it's an act of goodwill. I'm going beyond what I should. I'm trying to help. Okay, so just an example. Okay, I think you all can think of different examples as well. Okay, so yeah, a lot of you have a great idea of what's happening. So that's wonderful. Okay, so then we have takaful and ta'awun. Okay, when we look at cooperation between different economic agents, okay, they should be cooperating together. All right, now what does this mean? Is it possible to cooperate and compete? How does cooperation work? It means that as people, we have to go beyond our personal needs. Now, that doesn't mean that, oh, if I have a competitor, I stop competing with him, I leave the business. It doesn't mean that. I still compete with the person, but there is a way we can compete in an ethical manner. Okay? There's a way. You're like, what does that mean? Okay, I'll give you an example. If, for example, I'm working in a marketplace, okay, and I'm here, and in the next shop is my competitor, okay, and I find out that a few months later, my competitor who is next to me, he goes bankrupt. Okay, he goes bankrupt. I know his family, I know how he is, and this and that, but to me, I'm like, yes, I have one less competitor now. I'm happy. Is that a good thing? Right. Generally, you will feel bad, right? You'll be like, hey, I know him for so long. I know the family, and this and that. You should have feelings. You should have feelings of humanity. You should feel bonded to that person at some level, right? You guys are neighbors. Okay. Now, if your neighbor's house catches fire and stuff, you're like, oh, luckily, thank God it's not me, alhamdulillah, and stuff. And you don't even check up on then there's a problem there. There's that operational principle of ta'awun is missing. You can't be that way. As a person, as a social person, as a person who's competing against her, you have to try and help. It's like, hey, I can get you some stock from my supplier. Can I help in some way? Right? In some areas, right? In some markets, okay, there's something called a Bismillah trade. So in the morning, let's say, when I open my shop, I'm able to sell bread. Let's say I'm selling bread, and I'm able to sell bread. Okay. Then a second customer comes to me and wants to buy bread. But I already made my sale first. And I will be like, no, I'm sorry, why don't you buy from the next shop? Because the next shop didn't still make a sale. I made a sale, alhamdulillah. So, some marketplaces, they have this kind of value, it's so beautiful. They have this cooperative attitude. They're like, no, I made my first sale. I want everybody else to make a first sale as well. Then we can compete. Okay, so this is what we mean by cooperative behavior. It's about competing, yes, but it's not about hating and being ruthless about it. It's about caring, competing but caring. Okay, so again, it's something very unique in Islam, and sadly, a lot of these values are going away. We're losing these values. They're getting eroded. We're becoming ruthless. So we're focusing more on ourselves. Okay, next one is responsibility and accountability. I think this also comes from the first. Remember the idea of Tawheed, right? Okay, Allah is the absolute power, the absolute creator. He's the Malik, he's our Razak. Everything is from him, right? And therefore we depend on him, right? And therefore there is a responsibility. We have responsibility to Allah first, okay? Of course, right? We also have responsibility to people around us, social responsibility. Not only our immediate family members, even our neighborhood, right? Even to animals and the environment around us, we should care about it. If, for example, we have some litter and we just throw it out, then we have a problem, right? It means you do not care about your environment, your society, what other people think. Okay. So yeah, that's really nice, Mubarak, that you have this, and I hope we're able to document these things, because to be honest, it's very hard to find examples of these things. So it would be very interesting if somebody can do some research and say that cooperative behavior and somehow link it with Islamic values. That would be very valuable input into our discipline. Okay. So yeah, exactly. These days, the government pushes us to be responsible and accountable. That same social responsibility doesn't come from within, right? Which is sad. But in Islam, the operational principles are such that there has to be a system of accountability. When you do something, there has to be something like, there has to be a system where you are accountable. So if the government is borrowing money, then there has to be something that stops the government from borrowing too much. Okay, something like that. If we see corporations getting too big and controlling everything, then there should be a counter mechanism to control these corporations and say, no, no, no. If producers are getting too strong against labor markets, then there should be labor unions which are able to. So, there's a system of accountability. There's a system of check and balance, right? There's a system, there's a responsibility somewhere. Okay. All right. Then finally, there's moderation and balance. I think we don't need to explain this too much. I think you all know, right, that Islam, it's all about avoiding extremes. Any kind of extreme, even extreme in your, doing your rituals in Islam is extreme, is considered extreme. Allah didn't say that forget, your life here and just pray to me all your life. Go lock yourself up somewhere. Don't get married and stay in the corner and, just focus on religion. No, right? Right. The real test is making it all work together. Finding that fine balance, making sure that, your money isn't, your life isn't only about work, right? It's also about family. That you're able to balance the two things, right? It's about moderation. So every aspect, our economic system should be promoting moderation. But if you look at our work ethic, our working lives, no. Our lives are dominated by our work. In fact, our family activities with our family will be dictated by our work life. Oh, I'm sorry, I have to go to work. I have to do overtime. Oh, okay, no, I'm going to call up this. We can't go to the movies. Oh, can't you see I'm busy? I can't play with you, right? This is how we treat our social institutions. We don't go to the mosques. We don't mingle with people. Why? Because I have work to do. I got money to earn, right? But it should be a balance. In fact, our work institutions are trying to give us a social space, right? Our work institutions will give us leave, take us here, take us there, because they don't want us to leave. If we leave that environment, we stop serving them. Our objectives change. We start focusing on our sons too much, our wives too much, our kids too much, right? This is a problem, right? So they try and keep it all in one place. Anyway, you get the idea, right? Moderation and balance. Okay. Goals are also pretty straightforward. We achieve, right, the falah. The idea is to achieve falah, right? Again, just a quick reminder. Falah is what? Success in this world and the hereafter, right? So your success in the next life is contingent upon your success in this life. The way you approach life in this world is contingent on the next world. And of course, essentially the idea of falah occurs through the realization of the maqasid al-sharia, which is basically what Allah has sent down to us in terms of what we should do and shouldn't do. What are the guidelines in life? Okay, and as we follow that, we're able to follow those rules and achieve falah. In general, though, I mean, like qualifying it a little more, not in general. The earlier part was general. What we try to do is we promote virtues and prevent harm, right? I think we all know the Arabic phrase for that one, right? So the idea is to promote good and prevent harm as much as possible. That's a general goal. We try to achieve public or social well-being, which is maslahah, right? I was giving an example of inequality, right? Like removing that. So to remove social tension, to make sure people get along, right? People don't feel like outsiders. You know what? The poor aren't, you know, like when you have less, you're not ashamed of having less, right? Oh, I must have a brand. Oh, my bag is not Nike. My shoes are not Puma. My car is not BMW, right? You know, these kind of things. People should be free to use what they want without being judged. I mean, like, this is my path in life. This is what I think is valuable, but we feel shamed, right? According to those things, right? So, you know, when we look at maslaha, the idea is the social cohesion should be good. We shouldn't be so judgmental or critical of people who are different from us. Socioeconomic justice, okay? So, of course, the word here is socioeconomic, so I think it's quite clear, right? Justice to the economy, but also society, right? The two are not competitive. The two go together. Economy doesn't survive with society, right? And society will not survive without a thriving economy. Very simple, okay? Finally, the continual socioeconomic development. That means economies need to keep moving forward, progressing, right? There has to be growth, development. And this is not a static thing, yeah? In Islamic economics, it's something that continues, okay? So these are some of the goals of an Islamic economy. Again, not exhaustive, yeah? All right. This is an overview of what we are talking about all this time. If you see this overarching diagram, this grand diagram. So essentially we have the worldview right on top, right, which gives us our value system, right? We're talking about values. Then we have different systems. Here we're focusing on the economic system. On the left, we have political systems. On the right, we have social systems. And economic systems are developed according to the philosophy in Islam, okay? And operational principles that we create from those that we derive, that uphold those same philosophies. And then from there, we have goals so that we can reach them, okay? All right. So, okay. So there's a question about how principles are supposed to be practiced. So we have the principles, like for example, adl and ihsan, and these are enabled at different levels. So some of it will be at the government level, at the institution level. Some of them will be at the household level by our parents, our communities, right? Some of them are at the social level. Let's say you live in a neighborhood and they say that, no, you shouldn't be littering. All right. And some of them are your personal values that you pick up and you have a principle that, no, I will not, let's say, sit and talk while the azan is going on, just as an example, right? It's a reminder to all of us, right? That sometimes we're sitting and we're having a conversation, then the azan goes and we just pretend, you know, nothing happened, right? We can make a principle for ourselves that, no, when it goes, then I'm going to do this, right? So it's a personal principle. So principles, of course, can be enabled or practiced at different levels of society, right? Again, it will depend on many things, yeah. Okay. Yeah, okay, lively discussion going on. All right, so I think I explained this properly. And if you want to develop other systems, political systems as well, it should follow the same format, right? We look at what is the philosophy behind Islam, right? What is it? What are those underlying values that we need to have, right? And then we build on them and derive according to the discipline, okay? All right, next slide. Okay, so these are some of the things we're going to look at in terms of characteristics of an Islamic economic system. So when we, not only Islamic economic system, any economic system, these are some very defining features. If we are able to define or understand these elements of an economy, then we will know, we will generally be able to kind of profile that economy properly, all right? So these are some important characteristics. So it's important, two things. Number one, you know what these things refer to, what it means. And number two, you know where Islam stands on these things, okay? All right, so let's look at property ownership at first, right? Property ownership is, hang on, why isn't it changing? There. So when we look at property ownership, right, it's a very simple definition, right? The extent to control that a person has over assets. These assets could be physical or non-physical, right? It could be something like goodwill or, you know, but the idea is how much control you have over an asset and your ability to use it. So essentially, that's the essence of property ownership. So you might own something, okay, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have full use of it. Let's say you own a property, okay, yeah, very good, tangible and intangible assets. let's say you have a property that you own, okay? And what you do is, even though you own the property, you might still not have exclusive access. You might not have full access to that property because you may have rented out that property. So even though you own the property, okay, the physical property, the benefits of that property belong to somebody else, the person who is paying you the rent, okay? So remember, there are different aspects of private ownership you need to be aware of, okay? And that's why we talk about extent of control. How much control do you have? Do you have control over its fully, or do you have some partial control over some of its aspects, right? So this is why we have to differentiate when we talk about property ownership. It's not simply private, public, right? There's a bit more to it, okay? All right, so in Islam, right, we get the idea of mal and amwal. Mal, of course, referring to property, right? And it's plural. Then we have, it's mentioned 86 times in the Quran, and it refers to wealth, property, possessions, okay? And whatever one possesses, okay? And then milkiya, all right, and refers to the control over that asset, like we were talking about just now, okay? How much authority do you have about it, over it? Of course, I think we all know that the absolute owner is Allah, and that's why Allah being that owner, we have already certain limitations on what we can do with that property, right? Certainly you can't abuse that property. Certainly you can't cause harm with that property or whatever you own, right? So I think that's quite clear. And man as Khalifa and Abd has relative and conditional ownership, okay? And what is the condition? Utilization of betterment for mankind. That means that you have to utilize the property for bettering mankind. And that might invoke a lot of thinking in us that, okay, I bought a phone. How am I making mankind better by buying this extra expensive phone? Right? Am I using this phone to make myself more productive? Is it like making me more, useful, taking notes better, Bluetooth, whatever, fine. Or is it taking me away from being productive? Am I getting more stuck in my entertainment systems and things like that, right? So even when you're buying a phone, if you're thinking like, what am I doing with this phone? Am I really going to use it for a productive reason, right? Our intention behind it is very important. Something we don't think about enough. We just buy it because, we can, right? So yeah, remember that our ownership is conditional. And if you're not using it properly, it means that in principle, it can be taken away from us rightfully. Of course, it's not because of laws in society, but it can be, right? Because we're not using it optimally. Okay. Ownership continued. Man is responsible for society and accountable to God for his property. Okay, so that means that you can't use your property to jeopardize societal well-being in any way, all right? Like if it's like hoarding land and excluding people from using it, using land in a way that harms your neighbors or hurts the climate or whatever, okay? All of these things are basically, you're violating your contract with society. You're hurting them. And that is not allowed, okay? Of course, the ownership and use of property is a means to achieve falah. We were talking about it, right? Success in this world, ultimate success in this world and the hereafter. And man will be rewarded according to how property rights are exercised to achieve personal, social, spiritual welfare. I think this is quite clear. Let's go to labor, okay? This is very interesting, right? It's a very Marxian concept when we think about it. Of course, Marx is the one who's taking off a universal concept in Islam. And Islam gives ownership rights over what? Through labor. You are able to gain something, gain ownership, power over something if you apply effort. Okay? So that's why if you work harder in the house, then you can say that, look, I'm doing most of the things in this house. I have the right to make the decisions in the house. Okay? If you're the one who has created a product, then you have to be compensated so that somebody else can take ownership of that product because I worked on the product. So I deserve, that compensation. So, in Islam, right, if you can gain ownership of something by applying effort or working on something, okay? And similarly, the opposite is true. If you gain something without doing any work, right? Like if you're a middleman and you did absolutely zero, all right, but you're taking a commission, that is actually in the area of riba already, because you're taking an increment without any kind of value, underlying value there. You're just doing something for free. Okay, so exactly, yeah. So this is an example of the opposite of that is basically labor, and it makes sense, right? You apply effort, of course you deserve something. Why would you apply labor for nothing, right? So you deserve compensation. So labor is not something that's free, okay? You deserve compensation no matter what, and you can get ownership over something based on that, okay? All right. And that's why when you have partnership agreements in Islam, right? You have musharaka or you have mudaraba, right? Mudaraba is where you have the Rab al-Mal, the owner of the land or the capital, and you have the mudarib, the entrepreneur who doesn't have the means but has the ideas, right? And that's why the mudarib gets a share, right? The mudarib gets a share of the profits because it's his effort. It's not zero, right? So I think that's a clear example there. Both private and public property are legitimate kinds of property in Islam. Basically, it's saying that private and public property is allowed in Islam. So yeah, just a qualifying statement there. Okay, this is how ownership looks like, the ownership structure. Okay, you have two types of ownership, which is private and public. Under private, you have limited or you have complete. Remember, we're talking about whether you own the rights, fully. Okay, and this means that you have the rights over the benefits of the asset. Like, for example, your car is not rented out. You have the car and you can use the car, okay, or a house, right? So you can have limited or complete ownership in private. And under public, you have state and common. These are the two main. And then you have, of course, natural resource ownership as well. Okay, so you can own natural resources as well. And there are specific rulings on how to manage that. But in our discussion, we will put that under state. We'll discuss that under the state part. Okay, so we're still under ownership. We're just going into public ownership now. Okay, so when we look at public ownership, oh wait, we're talking still about private. Okay, so under private ownership, Islam recognizes complete or incomplete private ownership. As I was mentioning, you have the rights to, these are some of the rights under private ownership, okay? You can own it, you can use it, you can exclude others from using it, you can derive income from it, you can get compensation from it, and you can dispose of it, you can sell it, okay? So these are some of the rights. Of course, you don't have absolute rights. For example, you can't destroy it, right? Dispose here doesn't mean destroy, dispose here means sell, okay? Or pass it to somebody else, but you can't destroy it. All right, so rights are there, but it's not absolute. Owner is responsible to society or state and accountable to God. I already explained this earlier when we were in the earlier slides. Ownership is maintained through property, proper utilization, and meeting obligations attached to the asset. Okay, so this is what I was saying. And this is very interesting in Islam, by the way. If you are not using a property correctly, that means that, let's say you have an idle land, okay, and so the land is just sitting there, for years and years and years, okay, and in the meantime there are people who don't have land, who are starving, who are suffering, okay. Can the government forcefully take that land from private ownership? Do you think? If I have land which is idle, can the government forcefully take that land away from me because it's not being used productively? Okay, Mubarak says yes. Arinto says no. Yes, can. Yes. Okay, a lot of yes. Okay. All right. The general answer from an Islamic perspective, yeah? From an Islamic perspective is yes. The government can actually confiscate land, okay, and reassign it to more productive uses if the land is just sitting there for, it's just idle and it's not being used, especially in a time of crisis where you have a lot of poverty, food shortage, and the land can be used to contribute to that problem. Under those circumstances, the government can actually confiscate the land and make it usable. In Islam, you're not supposed to be hoarding resources and just keeping them for, your grandchild's grandchild in future because you've bought land for the previous generations already, right? That's just not allowed. That's not on. Right, so in many cases, right, people are so rich, they don't have land only for their kids, they have assets and things for their grandkids and their children in future. Come on, in this generation right now, people are not even able to provide for themselves, and here they have insurance policies for generations in future, right? So Islam prevents that kind of thing, right? There are very strong faraid laws, right, about how inheritance works in Islam just because of these kind of things. Okay. Similarly, if there is idle land just there, that's not being utilized, it doesn't have to be land. It could be something else, could be another asset. The government can confiscate it, okay, and put it to more productive use. And that means that either the government will use it, or the government will put somebody there who can use it properly, or the government will reach an agreement with the current owner to go into some kind of arrangement so that both of them can benefit. The government will say, I will put a person who will cultivate your land, you get some of it, and he keeps some of it, if you're not doing anything with the land. So there could be a pseudo agreement between the government and the private party as well. Okay, so just remember that this is there in Islam to prevent abuse. Okay, so I really find that very interesting that this option is there. Okay, yeah, unless of course waqaf land, then it belongs to Allah, and then you have already committed the purpose to something else, right? So yeah, okay. Now let's look at the contemporary part. This I put at the bottom for comparative purposes. Okay, so the comparison has already started, you could say. So when we look at ownership in the private, in a contemporary context, right, in a conventional context, right, private ownership is absolute. Okay, that means that you have your phone. You are angry with somebody. You want to smash your phone. Can you smash it? If you're angry, can you burn down your own house? Convention, yeah, conventional, not in Islam. Okay, yeah. You might have to answer if you put other people in danger, but if you want to break your own house and smash your own phone in the conventional, in the current situation, we're talking from a Western perspective, yeah, then you can. You have the right to do, legally you have the right to do that. Okay. From an Islamic perspective, that's why we say, from a conventional perspective, you have absolute private ownership. You want to destroy your property? Go ahead, destroy your property. It is your loss. Okay? All right? There might be some mitigating laws here, of course, but I'm speaking in principle. Okay? From an Islamic perspective, you cannot destroy your own property because you do not own that property. Allah gave you that. Allah has, granted you that property, and Allah is, gifting you with it. So of course you cannot do that, right? So that's the difference. So when we talk about Islam economy, Islamic economic system allows private ownership. Remember, the way we define private ownership is different from the way convention defines private ownership. In Islam, there are more restrictions on private ownership, right? Because of societal concerns, because of the collective concern, because of the next life. Right? These are considerations that are there in Islam, right? So it's a more comprehensive version of ownership, type of ownership. So private ownership in Islam is not absolute like the convention. Okay. The only way convention will stop you from burning something or destroying something is if you might harm somebody else. If your fire goes and burns somebody else's house, then there's a problem because you hurt somebody else. But you want to hurt yourself, go ahead. You want to smoke, destroy your lungs. You want to drink as much as, soft drinks, get diabetes, no problem. But for Islam, if you're doing that, then there has to be a line somewhere, right? You're not allowed to destroy things just like that. Okay. All right. Let's go to the next one. Okay. Public ownership is based on the hadith concerning the water, all right, fire, herbage, and salt, and each of them are in brackets so we understand. So when we talk about waters, oceans cannot be owned privately. Okay, it's a public good. Fire is basically a source of energy, so sources of energy can be managed by private companies. They can be managed, but the ultimate owner should be the government. Okay, herbage, when you look at forests and parks and areas like that, again, it should be government owned. And salt, basically you look at basic needs, then the government is the provider. So this hadith is the basis on which we are able to, justify basic human needs and rights, okay, and how the government's role is in managing the, utilities and things like that, okay? These categories should not be privately owned and are to be managed with maslaha as the central guiding criterion. So the quality of the government is very important in maintaining how these resources are managed, right? So bad government, bad management, good government, good management, right? So, but essentially the government's criteria is maslaha, okay? It's the people's welfare, And all these things that were mentioned on top, basically the oceans, the resources from the oceans, and land, you know, the minerals, sources of energy, okay, forests, parks, and basic needs, all of these things should be managed by the government in a responsible way. That means to promote maslahah. State-owned and managed, right? If these resources are state-owned and managed, for example, petroleum deposits and things like that, right? Then the government will own it and manage it, right? Like, for example, Malaysia, there's Petronas, and the idea is the government manages the resource for, you know, public upliftment. So the profits are going in developing the company, but as well as the country and other initiatives, okay? Commonly owned can also be, so commonly owned, right? This is commonly owned resources. These are public parks, beaches, and they must be equally accessible to all. You cannot deny somebody from using that. Underground resources, it will depend, all right? So there are some qualifications. If a certain mineral deposit is small and it is within your land, all right, a small one, a small amount, then yes, it can be privately owned, like you find a gold deposit. But if it's a mine that's really huge, right? Because you see, at the end of the day, remember, in Islam, the principle is that there isn't a concentration of wealth with anyone. Okay, this is the main thing. So if you see that the mine is so big and it's on your private property, but it's so big, you know, it can lead to national welfare or something, then usually the government should come into that space and manage it. Okay, so that's the thing. But if it's of a limited size and within your property, and there's some qualifications, there's some fiqh rules about it. I'm actually not, you know, a faqih or anything. So I think that when you go for your other class, also this would make an excellent question. Like, what is the basis of public ownership of private minerals found on private land? Okay, so I think you'll get some good answers there, right? But I follow the general principle that I said. Okay, like it's generally yours if it's there within your land and it's a small deposit. But if it's big enough to affect national welfare and things like that, then it's the government's, right, prerogative to manage it. And they could make a deal with the person who owns it and stuff, and they have a partnership arrangement. Those are also possible. Okay, like the government pays a certain amount of sum for compensation for using the land and things like that. Okay, so those are also possible. In the contemporary setting, well, public ownership is typically viewed as limiting and not enabling. Look at us. We look at the government as an enabler, right? But for them, the government, if the government is involved in a sector, in the energy sector, oh, they're inefficient, there's this, there's that, right? But in principle, they look at it as more government is bad in general, okay? And it's a limiting factor. But for us, it's the opposite. Like the government's involvement is meant to increase access and fairness, all right? So there's a contradictory notion here, all right? Next, we go to the second part, okay, which is the incentives and motivation behind our system. So the main motivation is, of course, seeking the pleasure of Allah. I think we all know this. We talked about falah already. That should be our main goal, okay? And from the Islamic worldview, this means, what does it mean, seeking the pleasure of Allah and seeking falah, right? It basically means practicing one's deen in a way that, right, making the best of what you were given. Okay, so I already explained this earlier, right? And the idea is that, you know, Islam recognizes both material incentives and social or moral incentives. Like if, for example, you see a person is suffering, right? A person gets hit or gets robbed or something, right? You're going to feel bad about that person. You're going to be like, oh, it's not me, you know, that person got hurt, you know. That means there's a social connection there, right? And, you know, if you look at certain countries, right, they motivate you using nationalism, right? If not, if your pay is low, still do it for your country, right? Teachers in public schools, right? You know, lecturers in public university, they're not paid as much as private, right? But what is their motivation? I'm doing this for the future leaders of my country. If I don't do it, who will, right? There's a sense of you know, that national belonging, except in Islam, it should be for the Islamic unity. It should be for everybody. It should be for humanity. You should feel that same way for anybody, okay? So generally, that's how it should be, okay? So when we look at, so Islam says that you can be motivated. When we look at incentives or motivation, it means that how are we supposed to motivate a person? if we look at our present economic systems around us, the present motivation is mainly cash. Cash, benefits, we'll get material benefits, right? There are some moral motivations there as well, like do it for your country, do it for your department, and things like that. But these are less emphasized. Okay, most of our motivation mechanisms are focused around the self. So we need to have systems where we're able to create motivation even for other reasons. Like we have spiritual motivation, right? Isn't it? Like I want to do this because I want the akhirah. I want, eternal happiness, right? And therefore you're willing to do something and you change your behavior for that. Okay, so yeah. So the incentives are derived from the primary sources as we understand them, right? And rationality includes spiritual realm. That means when we're making rational decisions, right, it shouldn't only be, oh, more money, more money, more money. If you keep doing that as a Muslim, you're going to feel guilty, right? You'll be like, why am I taking so much? Am I giving something back? So a Muslim with the right value system, right, would be feeling guilty about it and would be thinking of other things, that I can give this money to charity. I should do this. I should do that. Not thinking about themselves. I should get a BMW. I should get another house, right? So generally that's the thing, right? And the rationality is not only about like material welfare. Okay, we're also thinking about spiritual, that, Allah might test me, right? That's something you can't see, right? Like the way your opportunities are, it's something we believe that Allah can test us with something very difficult, right? And that motivates us to, behave differently, right? Like, oh, I want to do this because it's the right way to do it, and I want a benefit. So that benefit we can't see right now. That benefit exists maybe after we die. That benefit might be in the form of Allah favoring us with more opportunities, Allah opening new doors for us. We can't see that, but we believe in it, right? So our rationality is completely different as human beings. If you have, like, for example, an Islamic mindset, so to speak, right? Actions based on rewards, punishments that are tangible or unseen. I just explained this in the extended time horizon one, right? Because there's an extended time horizon. The way we make decisions are not only in this realm, okay? And when we're talking about punishments in different realms, we have, this world and the next world. And we have the ghaib, right? The world we can't see, the invisible world, and we have the physical world that we can see, people who are happy with us. But we can't see, another world that is still around us, that's affecting us, right? So we believe that punishments and rewards are happening in that realm as well, and they affect us. Self-interest has crowded out. So in the contemporary world, we see that self-interest has crowded out social incentives. This is generally true, right? I mean, it's not true always, but in general, when we look at it, like our systems are focused on rewarding the self. Even the way we live life, the choice of having children, right? How many children we have, committing to getting married, right? All these things are focused more and more on ourselves and less reliance on others, our social systems, our families around us, right? We depend less and less on people. Families are getting more and more nuclear. What's essentially happening is our social institutions are getting small and our work institution is getting more and more of the focus. Our material, like our work institutions, yeah. So essentially that's the general trend. Although we could ask, are there recent reversals in this trend after COVID, right? Have people become more socially oriented? Have they understood human values a little more and what it means to cooperate and work together? And so I think many people are more worried, especially with the climate crisis, right? Like there's more floods, there are more forest fires, there's so many record heat levels in the whole world, right? And because of that, I think a lot of our behavior is changing, even in COVID, right? People were lonely, people had psychological issues, people were forced to live together when they didn't want to, right? Because they had to be inside. So a lot of these things have opened us up to a more social narrative. That's why we're talking about SDGs. And so let's hope that it's a trend that makes it easier for us to understand Islamic economic values as well. So it's good that we are moving. If we are, maybe it's a temporary thing, but hopefully not. But it's actually in line with our values. Okay. Yeah, that is true. I was also working in a private school and they paid me peanuts. And I know that the students were being paid a lot. The students were paying a lot of money. So there is that. So that is true in some contexts. I agree. Yeah, I'm just saying it in a very general way. Okay. Okay. So how these concepts? Well, so once we like, for example, it's a good question. It's a very practical question. So if you start up a firm, okay, you will understand that Muslims are motivated by two different things now. Okay, one is of course money. So you won't say like, oh, promotion, money, money. No, you will not say that. You will say that, look, our work involves this kind of dimension, but our work also has flexi hours. You can work from home 3 days of the week. You can spend time with your family. We give you time for holidays, right? So you are now giving the motivation of another kind. You're giving social motivation, like work with us. We will reward you not only in pay. Yes, you might get paid a bit less, but you have other benefits that other jobs don't offer you. You can spend more time with your family because you have flexible hours. You can take more leave, right? So, you know, this is the thing. Normally when we're measuring benefits, oh, what's the money? What's the allowance? What's this? What's that, right? We do not look at work flexibility. We do not often, look for, let's say things like paternity leave. We're embarrassed, right? When countries offer paternity leave, like many countries offer paternity leave, we're embarrassed to take them. We're like, no, a man should be working. He shouldn't be at home leaving work and taking care of kids. So they're being paid to take leave and be with their family, and they're refusing to do that because in them, there's this value that, no, we shouldn't. We're men. This is a patriarchy problem again, right? You should be part of the family. Help your kids spend time, when you can, right? Build a relationship, right? So I think these are some of the issues. Yeah, exactly. So whenever you want to design an incentive, if the government wants to incentivize people to do something, if companies want to incentivize people to do something, right? They should be designing these mechanisms into the economic system. It's not only profit, utilization, right? It should be other things. That's the point. So that's how you bring it into the economic model. Okay. All right. Good question. Number 3, organization of decision-making. How are decision-making systems arranged? I have to speed up a bit. So decision-making systems are either centralized, that means top-down from the government, or it's decentralized, meaning democratic, like people are making the decisions. So how does it work? I mean, Islam, of course, recognizes both, okay? But it is important that there is a balance, okay? If there's too much centralization, the government is telling you what to do all the time, then there's a loss of autonomy, all right? That means that the government is making decisions for you, okay? What's wrong with that, by the way? If the government is moving you in a good direction, right? What's wrong with that? Anyone know? Because many people say that no, Islamic economic system should have a lot of government doing everything, government making people good, right? You see the problem with this, all right? And this says, yeah, paternalistic government, but what's wrong with that? Okay, so what's wrong? The state is making a good person. Okay, remember, why did Allah give us free will? Why did Allah give us free will? If Allah could control us, absolutely, right, and make us do it, why give us free will? Right? Yeah, if government is bad, that's a good point. If government is bad, then we're being controlled in the bad direction. But let's assume government is good. Okay? Right? Yes, Allah gave us free will to test us. Now, if the government is making us do things, how will Allah test us? How will we be accountable? So we are not really doing that test. So as soon as the government comes and starts making us do this, live in this way, have this many kids, work at this time, right? Then we are not doing the test. The government is taking away our agency of decision making, and we are no longer accountable to Allah for that. That means that the government is not allowing us to live the way we should be living. We are not being tested. Right? This is a very beautiful point brought up by Sheikh Imam Said Allah Maududi. He said, the more the big government, the less agency you have over your life, and you are not accountable to Allah for that anymore. The government is, but you aren't, right? So we have to be making decisions on ourselves. So if there's too much government, it's a problem. If there's too little government, again, there's a problem, because we will all go in our direction. I feel this is right. I should be allowed to do this. I should be allowed to do that, right? Again, too much freedom can lead to chaos. And then there could be a slide in our value system as well. So it's very important to remember that government is important. Yes, we need centralized authority, but we also need decentralized decision-making as well. Okay, and the two kind of balance each other. If we go too much in one direction, we're losing out somewhere. Okay, all right. Another very important thing, right, of decision-making, which we do not do enough of, is shura. Okay, and this is something that the Prophet ﷺ did a lot, right? Any kind of decision, he knows the answer. Sometimes, in many instances in the seerah, when you're listening to the seerah, in many instances, he knows the answer, but he will ask anyway. He will still ask anyway, like, oh, I'm planning to do this. What do you think? Right? Why do that? If you're getting divine inspiration, you know the right answer, then why do that? Right? And it tells us that shura is a very essential process of learning. Right? It's a way for us to understand, to inform us, right? And therefore the Prophet ﷺ is able to understand the mindset of what people are thinking, right? And he's able to answer in context when he's explaining, right? For us as well, right? If, for example, it's centralized authority and telling us something, to do something, right? It's still important that the government knows what we think about that law, right? The government should also find out, what do people think about this law, not just put a law, right? So getting people's perception, shura, like, getting people's opinions on something is very important. Whether it's a boss or whether it's a subordinate, right? You have to get it. Why? Because we are able to understand each other's mindset. And next time I might make a different decision based on your input. You might have thought of something I didn't think of. Allah's hidayah, Allah's wisdom comes from many different places. It could be, hearing somebody's idea might give you a completely different idea or mindset. So you don't know, right? So shura is a very, very central process of decision-making. So even if you know the right thing to tell your child, let's say, like I tell my children, I'll ask them, like, do you want to eat this? I know what they're going to eat for lunch, but I'm going to ask, so what do you feel like eating? Right? And then we'll have that whole discussion and talk about it and stuff. And then, I might sometimes impose, but sometimes I change my mind. They'll say, oh, we eat this all the time. The government will, the government does this all the time. All right, so the government might think, hey, I better change something. People are not happy. You get some input from both sides, right? So this is why, whatever it is, we have to make sure that we are able to, appreciate both perspectives, all perspectives, when we make a decision. And this is why, even in parliamentary debates, you have a debate. You have a debate. And, people don't just vote. Do you want this law? Yes or no? People can just vote, right? Why have the debate? The debate is so that you are able to appreciate the different perspectives and then you vote on that law. Okay, that's the essence of it. Okay, so shura is a very, very important part of our decision making. At the consumer level, you have to talk to other consumers. At the producer level, you have to get advice from other people. At the government level, you have to, talk to the people, right? So it has to happen. This kind of dialogue maintains a rapport and cohesion between different stakeholders. You're aware of each other's interests. Okay, very, very important. In the contemporary world, decisions are mostly decentralized. Okay, right? Yeah, that's true. A lot of, generally speaking, decentralized is good. And big government is bad. That means if the government is making decisions or imposing on us, it's a bad thing. So this idea of dialogue is there in parliament, but we have, again, populist movements which can override these kind of things. Okay, so, and that's why, it can be a problem when you don't have big government. Okay, big government can sometimes not fight back. All right. So in the contemporary world, decision making are mostly towards decentralized processes, but sometimes in countries like in some economies, you'll see government playing a very active role in very specific places, like in welfare states, welfare economies. Okay. All right. Next, the coordination mechanism. All right. A coordination mechanism is how things are organized in an economy, right? It's necessary to mobilize and enable resources and economic agents to engage in meaningful economic activity, right? Like, for example, production has to precede consumption, right? It has to not precede, right? You have consumption, right? Before consumption, right? The production has to take place, right? But again, before the producer decides what to produce, where do they get that input from? They get it from the consumer, right? The consumer basically tells them what they want through the price mechanism, yeah. And then the producer responds to that. And then you have to, the producer has to mobilize resources to make it, right? And then the consumer is able to get, this requires coordination. If there are no resources available to produce what they want, then there's a whole failure, right? So the discussion, this part is about how does an economy organize itself, all right? And the long and short of it is basically you have the price mechanism, the market mechanism, which does everything automatically, or you have the government, which is basically doing everything in a planned and coordinated way, okay? So these are the two options given here. I just mentioned them. It can automatically happen to the invisible hand of the market, right? As Ibn Khaldun and Adam Smith said, and the government's direct intervention through the Central Planning Authority. The government will say, no, this is what we need to produce for this group of people, right? So the government plans. Then the most market-oriented economies of the world, right, include central planning mechanisms. No matter how like market-oriented they are, like the states, you can say, oh, there's big corporations, this and that, but they have economic planning there, no matter what. Okay, so a planning authority is necessary. It's just the degree that matters. How much are they doing it? The most the central authority may opt for an indicative planning strategy instead of a central planning. Who knows the difference between indicative versus central planning? Okay, so the central planning is basically, indicative is basically guiding the economy, okay, giving incentives. Like if for example, the Pakistani government wants to, let's say, increase, improve the tech sector, right? Then the government, what they will do is they will throw subsidies, give tax holidays in the tech sector to attract firms there. So this is indicative. The government is indicating to the private sector, look, this is what we want to develop. Let's go in this area, okay? So they signal very openly to the private sector, and they provide incentives, then the private sector will kind of take advantage of those incentives. So that's indicative planning, yeah. We passed 10:30. Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't realize. Okay. Yep, and then, all right, thanks very much, Jasmine. I wasn't paying attention to the time. I'll wrap up. So, basically, the most market economies of the world, yeah. So the central authority, somebody asked about the currency. It's a good question. Currency mechanism, of course, government needs control. The more you get decentralized, the more we've lost control over it. But again, the government needs a check and balance. The monetary authority also needs a check and balance, okay? That's another discussion. I think it's upcoming in future discussions as well. All right. Let's quickly go through this. The coordination mechanism, all right? If we look at this, Islam generally supports market system. Okay, so market dominant, yeah, in Islam. The market dominates more. The price mechanism is more efficient. And there's a hadith in Tirmidhi to that extent. Market in Islam must reflect the norms and values in consumption. It has its own market set. Okay, even the Prophet ﷺ was reluctant to intervene with changing the prices. Okay, so there are instances of where it happened. There are instances of when it hasn't. Where it hasn't happened, but basically, generally, the market is the more efficient allocator, okay? And the government can tweak and fine-tune or remove elements which are harmful. So essentially, the market mechanism dominates in allocation of resources. Important thing to remember, okay? Government ensures that the government's job is to ensure that the rules are preserved and followed, okay? There's a unique institution called Al-Hizbah, all right? This is an economic watchdog institution. And it's specifically there to safeguard the economy, right? Economic interests and things like that, okay? It's based on basic needs, okay? So Islamic controlling housing prices, like what was done in China when real estate prices were going very high. Actually, what the Chinese government said that, no, this is ridiculous. This is against the public welfare, and real estate prices are, there are a lot of foreign players in the market. So the government came in and regulated housing prices. So because it's a basic need, the government can do that, but the government should be doing that at the lower spectrum of the market, okay? Not where the rich players are, right? It should be doing in terms of affordability, right? Good question. So Al-Hizbah is a unique institution, remember, that is unique to Islam. It's sort of like a Ministry of Economic Affairs, and this basically looks at all the justice aspects of the economy, right? Does the producer have too much power? Does the consumer have too much power, right? That kind of thing. Is there monopoly, right? Are businesses being run fairly? All these kind of elements, right? Fairness and all the pricing, right? Pricing of basic needs and things like that. These are all essential parts of what the Hizbah does, okay? generally, yeah, even similarly in the contemporary world is very similar. Generally market dominated. The government intervention leads to inefficiency. That's what they believe. Okay, this is not always true, because if you look at the US and the history of US, right, it was actually the big government during the space race in the Cold War, right, that gave us internet technology. It was the support of the government that created companies like Google and Apple. Without the policies that the government created, these things would never exist. Big corporations would never exist. So, you know, we should give credit where it's due. It's not only the big corporations that came out of nowhere themselves. There was a lot of things in the environmental ecosystem, right, that helped nurture these big companies. So it's actually government that created these benefits, all right, these opportunities. All right, so although we might think that, oh, you know, economies like America, they're very market, the government played a huge, huge role. Okay, so yeah. Okay, we just have a few more. I'm going to skip a few. The role of the state, basically the government is an enabler and preserver. Okay, my slides are pretty much explanatory, self-explanatory. You can go through it. Okay, if we look at an overall conclusion, right, the characteristics of the two extremes. Now we're going into the comparative directly. We have private and property ownership in capitalism is private, and under socialism is public. I think you know this. Motivation, self-interest, and then socialism is altruism, thinking of the greater, you know, the greater people, right? Everybody else, the collective. Decision-making is decentralized in capitalism. You make your own decisions, whereas centralized in government. Government decides what happens, what to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce. Coordination is through the market versus planning, right? The government plans everything. All right. Now, when we look at the Islamic one, okay, if you look at Islam's one, it's somewhere in between. Okay, so we have the two extremes. Islam is in between. Property is private and public, like we saw, right? Decision-making, shura, it's decentralized and centralized, but the shura process. Coordination mechanism, it has both, but market is greater than planned. And role of the government is facilitator and protector or preserver of values. Okay, that's also there. So we know that the Islamic economy falls somewhere in between, but that's very vague, right? Because we don't really know relative to modern economies where does an Islamic economy stands. So let's try and look at that a little bit. Okay, we can't do this now, right? Unfortunately. But if we look at the real world economy, right, comparisons, we have the Anglo-Saxon capitalist model, right? Look at these three versions. Okay, we have the Anglo-Saxon model, which is what we have, UK, US. We have the European model, right? These are all mixed economies, by the way. Okay. These are all mixed economies, and you know, there are different variations. So where would the Islamic economy fall if we're looking at these three on the spectrum, right? We have on the left side, we have you know, the American one, and then we have the European one. European, you know, they're a bit heavier on the welfare side of things. The government is a bit stronger on welfare. I think you all know this. Then we have the Asian model, right? If you look at the Asian model, it's a bit closer because the government intervention is a bit stronger there, right? So we have Anglo-Saxon model, but stronger institutional arrangements with more government presence. Okay, so best real example is Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, even Malaysia, Singapore. These are all examples. So where would the Islamic economy stand on this spectrum, do you think? In the middle, yeah, but these are all positions of wasatiyah, right? Okay, all right. So again, it's something that we don't know for sure because, you know, there's so many varying degrees. Okay, this is the final part. If we look at the types of capitalism in advanced countries, okay, look at the government intervention, right? So again, when we compare with the real world, it's very hard. We get a clear idea. Just saying that we're in between is not enough anymore. So like somebody mentioned, we need to differentiate between personal and private property, right? The differences start coming out in these areas. Like, what is the exact role of the government, right? It comes down to brackets and percentages and things like that. And it will come down to values as well. And without a clear definition of values, it's very hard to, you know where we are exactly. And that's what I said here. We have a general conception of where we are. However, it is difficult for us to understand exactly what place we are in. And without these advanced dimensions, like looking into these specific areas, we will never know what our values mean. Okay. Finally, we need to understand, we need to internalize these Islamic values so that we are able to kind of move forward. I'm sorry, towards the end, it got a bit rushed. Everyone, my time management wasn't very special today. It's because I replaced some of the diagrams, which were all in one. They became like 3 slides each. But I hope it was, informative. Apologies to the moderator and, event management people. Hopefully the next session doesn't happen this way. All right. Thanks very much. Assalamualaikum.